Hello and welcome to OctopusDo. I'm Christian Ross, and today I am bringing you, along with my good friend Nero here, the new project, which is making a scarf pin. The last one that we did was making a scarf, and so we wanted to show you how to make this scarf pin that will hold your scarf in place. As Nero was demonstrating here, he was playing with the scarf and it didn't move at all. That's our project today. Let's get started. For this project, you're going to need some wire, and I am using a 14 gauge artistic wire, which is a craft wire that has a copper core, a silver coating on top of that, and then a polymer coating which keeps it from tarnishing immediately. But if you scuff that coating off, of course, it will tarnish. So be very careful with your tools. So 14 gauge on the artistic wire. There's an option of copper as well, would look gorgeous. I find it handy to have a wire straightener, and that's going to help you straighten out your wire because it does come rolled up, and that will let you start from a straight line, and it makes it much easier to work with. Then you're going to need a ruler if you want to be exact on this. I tend to guesstimate a lot or work off of the wire spool, but if you're someone that needs measurements, definitely make sure that you have your ruler. And you're going to be using 2 pieces of wire. One to make the heart is approximately 13 inches in length, and then to make the arrow that goes through the heart will be approximately 9 inches in length. So 13 inches and 9 inches. In addition to the wire, the tools that you're going to need are definitely a good pair of flush cutters that will cut up to this 14 gauge that we're using. So flush cutters, you're definitely going to need a pair of round nose pliers to make the fine turns in your wire. And I find it very helpful to also have a pair of flat nose pliers. Now, flat nose pliers are the ones that kind of look like wedges from the side, and they're flat from the top, no teeth on the inside. Make sure that your jewelry making tools don't have teeth on the inside, because that certainly will mar your wire. The round nose pliers that I mentioned, they look like cones and therefore making loops. After these pliers that you definitely need, you might find it helpful to have a mandrel or a pair of mandrel pliers such as these from Wubbbers. These are the large, round bail making pliers, and you can use these to shape the curves in your heart, but I'll show you what I like to do, which is just letting the wire kind of tell you which way to go and bending it with your hands. If you feel more comfortable using a surface to bend things around, definitely these mandrel pliers are a great purchase to have. The final stage of making your scarf pin will involve hammering it to work, harden, and texture it. So you're going to need a chasing hammer, and I have the beadle-on chasing hammer here that you may have seen me refinish on my jewel tool. So I have a chasing hammer. Then you'll also need something to hammer against. So I have the bench block helper, which is a great bench block. If you don't want texture on top of your pin, but you do want it to be nice and stiff to hold up, then you can use the nylon disc that comes with the bench block helper instead, and I'll show you all about that. And the final stage is, because you want your pin to be able to go through your scarf without snagging on anything, you need a file or a bit of sandpaper. These are all the tools that you're going to need for this project, so let's make a pin. Starting with my roll of wire, the first thing that I do is I will pull it out, and you see it's a curved shape. So to make this straight, I take my wire straightener, hold it in my hand like so, roll it around. So I'm basically closing my fist, and that rolls it around the wire, and I pull the wire through, and that will help straighten it. Do this more than once to get a nice, smooth finish. If you find your wire bending more one way than the other, then sort of turn your hand in the opposite direction as you straighten this, and that will help you get more of a straight line. There we go. I think I can work with that. Cut your first piece, which is going to be the piece for the heart, which, as I said, is going to be approximately 13 inches. So I measure, and at my 13-inch mark, I just go ahead and cut this. I'll show you. I'm going to hold on both sides so I don't send wire going everywhere. Repeat this process a second time to get your 9-inch piece, but set it aside and we'll deal with that later. The first thing that I do with my 13-inch piece of wire is I make the cleft in the center of the heart, which is a loop around part. And I just do that with my fingers. However, if you want, you can use your round nose pliers for this point. But basically, what I do is I come down about 5 inches and I basically start bending this in half. And as I bend, I'm watching the curve on this to make sure I don't get any sharp angles. So as I keep bending around, I want the ends of my wire to cross over each other just a little bit, like so. And there you go. Here I have just this particular shape, this kind of drop shape. I can pull it a little tighter if I like, but that looks nice. So this is the part of the heart that is the cleft, which goes down the center. Now my heart shape is a lopsided heart. One lobe is a little bit bigger than the other. It's a little offset, and you know, it's fun that way. I'm not trying to make both sides symmetrical. That's a little bit harder. Plus, I like the asymmetrical look. I'm going to make the long side, the lobe that's on the long side of my wire is going to be the bigger lobe of my heart. So I'll start there, and I grab with my right hand this overlapping loop that we made, and I'm going to start bending the long piece here. And my hands are not in the middle. I'm not sitting here and just bending like up against where I want it to bend. I'm grabbing the center here and just easily manipulating the wire. And you see, I start to get a kind of an edge there, so I want to come up here, and now I'm getting more of a round shape here and not an edge. So I just keep working this around until it's the shape that I want it to be. And if you have problems with this, if you have problems with your hands, if this is too thick of a wire for you to work with comfortably with your hands, then definitely use your pliers. That's what they're for. Here we go. So that's cute. Kind of have a little curlicue going on here. So then I'm going to make the other side, which is not quite as big of a round piece. So I'm grabbing this overlapping part with my left hand this time, and the end of the short side, and I do the same technique, the same process. As I work, I just want to make sure that I don't have any sharp edges. I want this to be very rounded and very flowy. That's looking really good so far. Do you see how the ends kind of cross over a little bit? I'm really liking how that's showing up so far. That's really pretty. So when this lays down here, this part is going to be the highest point, and this will be off to the side. So just manipulate that the way you like. Just keep bending and keep playing with it. If you have a hard time bending the wire with just your hands, using your pliers is just fine. So I'll show you again making that center circular point, but I'm going to use my round nose pliers this time. Be careful and don't pinch too hard because you'll end up putting a divot in your wire. So I grab the wire about 5 inches down, and I'm grabbing it toward the end of my round nose pliers here. I then bend it pretty much in half around the pliers there, and then keep going because I want them to overlap, remember? Like so. And that's what I have. Now, before I used my fingers to just bend the heart around, but if you need to use your mandrel pliers, that's fine. Grab these here and just roll around. And flip over for the other side. I'm using a smaller barrel for the other side. And that's what that looks like. As the wire warms up in your hands, it actually does make it easier to work with. It makes it a little bit more malleable, which it's very odd because it's wire, but it does warm up in your hands and make it easier to work with. Now I want this particular shape here to this particular side to not come around and go straight out this way. I want this to come around and then curve back in like an S shape. So what I do is I'm holding my heart here with my thumb across the top, and that's going to keep this part from moving. But I want this to come around, and so I really almost, I'm really just petting the wire with my thumb, and it gradually moves over to get that S shape I'm looking for. And that's what I do to keep from getting those harsh edges, to keep from getting bends that are awkward. I just kind of coax the wire to do what I'm looking for it to do. Now, on this side, I kind of want it to come out and do that S shape as well, but not as drastically. It's not going to be like it is on this side. So I just do the same thing. I'm using my first finger here to just kind of manipulate that. And so I have something that looks like this so far. I decide where I want my wire to cross over, because this short side is going to wrap around the stem. And I really kind of like how that is looking. Now, to give myself a bit of a handle on this, I'm going to go ahead and curl this end. Now, when I cut this with my flush cutter, I cut this on the flat side, so there's not a point on this, but if I want to, I can make sure that it's smooth and not catch on any fibers by running my file over the end. So I'll do that just a little bit. I don't have to worry about that so much on this side. I definitely have to worry about it though on the arrow that we're going to make. There we go. You can also use a wire rounder on the end of this, and that would be very handy as well. Now I'm going to need my pliers. I definitely need my round nose pliers at this point because I'm going to make a small loop, and my fingers are not strong enough to get in here on this 14 gauge wire and make a teeny tiny loop. I really can't grab that end to do it, so I'm using my round nose pliers. So I want to make a loop here, and I want it to curl toward the heart. I'm coming in, and I want it to be a decent sized loop. So I'm grabbing the wire about halfway down the barrel of my chain nose pliers, and I'm grabbing it right at the end there. I'll put my finger against the wire and against the pliers, and I roll my hand to get that loop to go over. Now you see, just by rolling around, I didn't quite get this point to meet there. So basically I have to adjust my grip. So I let go and turn my hand again and come back and keep rolling until that point meets itself. Now what that's done is that gives me a way to finish off the end of this wire, but it also gives me a handle because I'm going to take this end here and wrap it around the stem for the heart to complete this shape. So I'll put my thumb right there, my thumb and first finger, and I'm holding that loop, okay? And then I'm supporting my heart with the other hand to keep any of this from bending out of shape. I don't want any of this to bend out of shape. So I'm holding that, and then I'm going to twist around. Looks like about 2, I can do that 3 times. There you go. And again, if that's very hard on your fingers, then just come in here with your flat nose pliers and you can grab that end and pull it around. I've made this one a little bit smaller than my sample here because these are very free-form. They can be different sizes. I didn't quite need all of this 13 inches, so I'm going to come in and just for this one, I'm going to trim about 2 inches. And that's going to look something like this. I'll hold it. All right, now how I want to finish this off is I want to curl this into a loop. And so when I put my arrow through here, it's going to go through the lobe of the heart and then all the way down into the loop. Grab my round nose pliers again because my fingers are not strong enough to make a loop on this. I want this loop to be big so that the arrow has a nice big pattern or nice big space to flow into, and I don't have to look for that end when I'm pinning my scarf. I'm going to hold my wire with the round nose pliers, and this time I'm holding it at the very back side of my round nose pliers, so it's going to make a bigger loop. Okay, I'll turn this here so you can see what I'm doing. I'll put my thumb there so I'm supporting the wire and rolling against it, and I turn my hand. Got that just part way around. So what I have to do, if my hand is here, I open my hand, roll it back, and turn again until the end of the wire meets itself there. All right. So this is your heart shape. I think I want more of a curve here, so I'll do what I did before and just kind of pet that with my thumb. There we go. The next step is to make the arrow part of my pin. So I've got the 9-inch piece of 14 gauge wire, and that's what I'm going to use for the arrow. I'm going to use my flat nose pliers to try to get more of an angle. Now because this is really thick wire, even if I try to fold it in half, it's going to be a rounded end. It's not going to be a very sharp point. That's okay. But using your flat nose pliers is definitely going to help. So about 1 inch down on your wire, I'm holding this in my flat nose pliers, and I put my finger under here to support, and I'm going to make the V shape of the top of the arrow. So I roll, and I have part of the V shape. Now because I was supporting this side right here with the flat nose pliers, it's a little bit more straight than this side. So what I do is I come in on this side and put my flat nose pliers here and just press a little bit, and that makes that more of a 90-degree angle and more of a point. Because I'm not soldering anything together, I need to make the arrow shape, and I do that by coming down a little less than 1 inch on this side, and I bend my wire back up toward the point. So press against my thumb and bend toward the point. So now I have kind of a flat 4 shape. There we go. Then I come back right under the point and I'm going to make the shaft of the arrow. So I turn this down, and again go on both sides with my flat pliers to get a little bit of a sharper angle. And that's my arrow. I just kind of work it around a little bit with my hands. Maybe change the angle if I need to, but there you go. That's the shape of my arrow. Now I do want this to curve a little bit, so I'm going to pet this just like I did the other side, just like I did the heart. So these will fit together. I'm going to test fit these. So I come through the large side, go down, and then back up, and it's going to go through that loop on the end. But you can see it's not really enough curve. So what I'll do is I'll take this and bend it back just a little bit. So flat nose pliers, bend it back just a little bit, and so that'll fit just like that. So this is basically what your design is going to look like, but to help it keep its shape, I'm going to hammer it, give it a little bit of texture and a little bit of interest. So that's what we've got so far. Next step, hammering. So we're going to hammer this, and we need to do this very carefully so that we don't really damage the wire. So what I've got is my bench block helper, and it has a nylon head. If I want to just work harden my wire without flattening or putting texture on it, what I can do is put my wire here on the bench block, and then I take the nylon top, sit it on top, make sure my fingers are not in between where they meet, and just hold this gently here, and then hammer this just like this. This really makes a difference in your wire. It makes it more stiff, more resilient. So you really want to do this step last so that you're not trying to bend your wire after you've worked hardened it, because that surely will cause you problems. You'll end up snapping the wire and then just being frustrated. This is a lot stiffer than it was, but it doesn't have any texture on it. It's not flat, it still looks round. Beautiful like that, not really a problem. But I would love to put some texture on here. What I'm doing is I'm holding my wire down here on the bench block again, and then I'm going to hammer it directly. So I have my chasing hammer, which is nice and smooth and flat. First thing that I'm going to tell you is where you hold the hammer. Don't hold it near the head like this, because you'll end up just really putting a lot of strain on your wrist, and you don't want to do that, and you're having to hit it harder to get the same result. You really want the hammer to do the work. So what you're going to do is on this ball end of the hammer, that's the part that fits in your hand. So you hold this in the palm of your hand like so, and you're going to hold it loosely so that when you hammer, it's going to just kind of bounce up and down in your hand, and so the hammer itself is the part that's doing the work. You're not having to hold it up here and hit very hard. That's a good tip for you. Let the tool do the work. So I'm holding this by the end, and I'm keeping my fingers that are not holding the hammer very far away from the point that I want to hit. So I'm keeping my fingers near the edge of my bench block, because believe me, I've hit my fingers enough to know that that's not what you want to do. So I come in here and I'm going to hammer just lightly to flatten. See what that looks like? Now that definitely has a flat shape. Now I didn't put any texture on this. You can see it's very smooth. And that's because when I hammered, the flat part of my hammer was pretty much straight up and down. If you want to add texture, you can hammer at an angle, or you can use the ball side of your hammer here instead of the flat side, and that will give you some texture. If you want to spread the wire out as you flatten it, instead of hammering straight up and down like I did, what you'll do is you're almost hammering away. Then make a motion almost like you're painting with the end of your hammer. You're going to sweep away on the downstroke. That would look something like this. And I'm hammering in the same spot. I don't know if you noticed, but moving the wire around. So that gets everything that I want to get. Now I'm still not putting any texture on this. I just spread that flatness out a little bit. I want to do the same thing with the curved part of my arrow. So I just flip that around and do the same thing. Here we go. So what this has done is this has made this a lot harder to bend. It really is a lot harder to bend. So this is going to keep this shape a lot better now. Now we're going to do the same thing to our heart. Something that I want to tell you about this is don't ever hammer over where wires overlap. So basically, on your heart, you don't want to hammer exactly here where these two wires overlap, or here where you wrapped around. Because what happens is you can press the wires against each other and it will weaken the wires at that point because they're going to be thinner than the rest of the wire around it after you hammer it, and so that's going to be a good place for it to break. So avoid hammering where the wires cross over each other. And to do that, I lay my heart down here and I have this crossover point toward the edge and this crossover point toward the edge, so I'm just going to hammer this lobe. Now I want this to be rather thin down here, but I really want to spread that out to make it a nice fat heart lobe. So I'm going to use that technique of painting or making that sweeping motion. So I hold this here and I start hammering along that top side. Now, because I really wanted that to spread out, I hammered a lot harder than I did on the arrow. But look at the difference that makes. It's kind of like calligraphy, where you have the thicker lines and the thinner lines. All right, I'm going to do the other side. Now this is still very flat, but where I have tried to widen that lobe out, it's curling up a little bit. I can emphasize this by lifting up on the side. This is not, if I leave it flat, the same plane, then everything is going to remain flat. But if I want this to curve, I can lift this up. So you see my finger here is under, so it's more angled this way. And I do the same hammering, but this time it's going to curve a little bit more. There's the difference on that. And I'll do that to the other side. So just play with that and get that to look how you like it. Now I do want to hammer that just a little bit in the middle, but remember, don't hammer at the top. I'm just going to set this on the edge and aim for this center part. There we go, just a little bit. And then I want to do this curve very lightly because I'm not trying to spread this one out. I just want to work harden and flatten a little bit. And then the circle down here at the end, I want to spread that one out. And I curved it up while I was at it. The last thing is I'm going to see if I can get precise and get this little guy right here, this little loop. I lay that on the edge and just give it a little hammer. All right, that is looking pretty cool. Now, when I spread this out, do you see the tip here ended up moving away from the stem? And so I can come in here with my pliers and just move that back again using the round nose pliers. And I just grab and turn. There we go. Maybe a little bit more. Don't want any fibers or threads getting caught down in there. And then I'm going to give that a little bit more of a hammer. So let's see how all this fits together. The last step now is taking care of the point on the back of the arrow, because the way I cut this just with the flush cutter, this is a rough cut, but I want this to be able to go through fabric or my yarn or anything like that without snagging, so I need to make sure that this has a point on it. Now, I'll take my flush cutters to give myself a bit of a head start. I take an extreme angle here, so I've got my wire coming out this way, and I aim my flush cutters at about as sharp of an angle. Like, I'm not cutting here, I'm cutting along the end, and I'll cover that so it doesn't go flying. Now that gives me a pretty sharp point. However, it's still rough. So I'll come back here, and I'm using my bench block, this time just to hold my file. So I'm putting my file on the bench block, and instead of holding the wire and trying to file it, put the file down, and I'm going to take the wire and I'm going to go back and forth on the file, but as I go, I'm turning my hand so that it files it in kind of this roundish fashion. Now the back of my arrow, ironically, has a knife. And that's all it takes to make your scarf pin to go with the scarf that you make on your goddess loom. Thank you for joining me with this scarf pin project, the perfect companion to any scarf that you make on the new Goddess Loom. I'd also like to introduce you to one of my other cat bosses. This is my princess, and her name is Sky, short for Skyrocket. And she is my old Siamese. If you subscribe and click on notifications, you'll learn when any new videos come out, and you'll get to meet more of my cat family. And definitely any subscriptions helps my channel along. If you liked this video, give me a thumbs up, give me a like. If you didn't, completely understand. A thumbs down is okay, but either way, leave me a comment below. I love reading your comments. Let me know what you'd like to see coming up next. Now you know, go make something.